Building an R&D Agenda. The purpose of the whole two-day workshop was to kick off the development of an R&D agenda that would allow us to develop the knowledge and tools needed so that 20 years from now, as these predicted interface technologies emerged, they could be born accessible instead of having access to them follow years later. At the end of the 2 days, participants gathered to begin the process of constructing this agenda. This was done with an open collaborative discussion and a document open for any of the 1,500 people who signed up for the workshop to contribute directly. Discussion on this will continue after the workshop on Discord and on the futureofinterface.org website. We're going to open this up to everybody, all of the previous panelists in a minute. But before we did, I asked a few additional people to come on board who were not on the panels to share some thoughts with us. In particular, I've tried to pick people from different backgrounds. And if we're creating a research agenda, the question would be, where do we want to put the focus for the different the people? So if you're from industry, the research agenda is going to be useful to funding agencies, of course, but it's also going to be of interest to many people with other different backgrounds, professors, graduate students, companies who have major R&D programs now running in them, as well as the individual developers, AT developers, people who are developing things for their family, for family members, and for others, for companies. And so I have a number of perspectives, and so I've asked them to speak just very briefly up front about what they think a research agenda should look like in order to be most useful to them or their constituencies or constituencies they know about. And I'm going to start with Aaron Steinfeld. Aaron's been involved with many rehabilitation engineering research centers and many other kinds of projects, and comes from a research scientist, designer, who is interested in actually creating solutions that make impact on people's lives. So Aaron, in looking at a research agenda, just any characteristics that you think the research agenda should have. By the way, I'm just asking up front for characteristics. We're going to loop back later for topics, et cetera. So Aaron?
Sure. So one of the things that we've done a lot in our teams here at Carnegie Mellon, specifically in the groups that I've been working with, is focusing very heavily on universal design approaches, which shouldn't be a huge surprise for those of you familiar with the disability research space. And one of the reasons why that is very common in my group is we do a lot of work in transportation, and especially public transit. And transit is by definition kind of a universal design service, right? It's supposed to serve as many people as possible from as many diverse backgrounds as possible, from as many geographic parts of the region as possible. And what we've seen is that many of the same problems that people with disabilities have, and much of the information that they would like to have access to, is very similar to the information and problems that everyone else experiences. And in that regard, I think many barriers can be removed up front, thereby mitigating the need for, shall we say, extensive assistive technology solutions, or at the minimum, lowering the bar for the assistive technology solutions. So an example is a low floor bus. So for many years, high floor buses were common, and if you used a wheelchair or a cane and you wanted to get on the bus, you had to go up the steps. This obviously was not ideal. Wheelchair lifts broke constantly, or were claimed to be broken. And when the industry moved more towards low floor buses and the flip out ramps or the easily deployed ramps, the single step, sometimes zero step entrances, people with disabilities saw a dramatic decrease in the problems with boarding buses. There are still problems, don't get me wrong, but a dramatic decrease in the number of boarding problems. And at the same time, the rest of the population benefited greatly, and transit agencies benefited greatly because the general public was boarding the buses faster. They weren't climbing steps, and so the dwell times at bus stops were lower, service was better, so forth. Safety was better too. So I think this is an area where in the information technology space, we can do a lot of benefit by essentially lowering the step that needs to be taken to make information technology accessible by trying to lower that as much as possible with a universal design upfront. And this also pushes the problem into the mainstream, mainstream design space, which is also, of course, beneficial because you don't have to fight as many battles after the fact or with smaller resources. So that's kind of the big selling point that I argue is let's use universal design to push that step down as much as possible so that the assistive technology elements are not as big a leap.
Okay. I'm trying to sort out exactly what the format of the research from that is.
So to be clear, sorry, I should have been explicit on that. When we run studies, we collect data from our target populations, people with disabilities, but we also collect data from the general population, because if we can show that the benefit has value to the general population, that allows us to sell that design idea or that approach to the broader market, because we can show that this is not just a niche solution. This is something that everybody wants.
Got it. Captured. Very good. Bruce Bailey is from the U.S. Access Board. Bruce, why don't you briefly tell people about the Access Board if they're not already familiar? I think most everybody here is well familiar with it. But anything that anything about the format that might make it more useful to the Access Board?
Thanks for having me, Greg, and everyone else. Yes, I think your panelists here probably have heard of the Access Board. We're a very small boutique agency, but I would be surprised if everyone in the audience knows what we do. But we're the small agency that's behind the design requirements, the specifications, the regulations for what makes an accessible building under the Americans with Disability Act, the ABA, and I'll say most importantly, 508 of the Rehab Act, because that's where the part of it that I work on is defining what is an accessible computer ICT in terms of the federal government being interested in procuring it. And I love Aaron Steinfeld's story there, because I'm realizing that our regulation doesn't help with any of the better products there, because everything you described probably meets it. But with the lower floor makes it more usable and better and more deployable. And I think that kind of gets at my perspective of the format of the research as a regulator. We just need things that we can say, well, do this all the time, everywhere. And what are the specifications or the details of the coming out of the research that we can actually turn it into the law, which is a kind of a high bar, but we're also setting the bare minimums as well. So that's not the funnest space to be in, to say, hey, because we're, myself, all my colleagues, we're all advocates as much as anyone on your panel, and yet we're saying, okay, this is the least we'll accept for. But again, the coming out of the research being in a format that we can turn into regulation and enforceable, that's why I'm on your panel today.
Yep. Also, if it can support it, like if you have things, I know that whenever you do an ANPRM, one of the things you're looking for is any documentation, because you have to do a report on each set of regulations you come out with, and so it gets really important there.
Yes, the regulatory impact analysis, it can't be the least bit inspirational or aspirational. We need good, strong justification, and that's where the research feeds in.
I'm going to actually jump out of order here just a bit to bring in Mike Pluk, since he is basically your European counterpart. Now, Mike is not like you, he's part of a team, but he's really been at the center of organizing and at least the touchstone I have for all things EN 3501, EN 301, 544, 7, and he is the European equivalent of Section 508, which is also being used internationally. So, Mike, your comments in either amplifying or with Bruce's.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to it's EN 301549 is the actual standard. But yeah, yeah, and very much it. There was a policy when that was developed to mirror the Section 508. So we are very much in terms of trying to be compatible with it, so that we have made a sort of global standards really. So yeah, we're very much on the same page there as Bruce. Different model, but the same same aims really. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the research, I mean, what it strikes me is that the majority of what we have in these standards is quite applicable to quite a broad range of existing technologies, user interface technologies. But obviously some of the upcoming technologies are radically different, and therefore it's questionable whether the existing standards related to those would apply very, very easily. I might be interested to find, I mean, we did some work in ETSI on the standards organization, ETSI, the European Standards Organization, looking indeed at future technologies, user interface technologies, and trying to predict which ones might come and what might be some of the issues related to accessibility of those technologies. And in fact, I think I shared the document with Greg just before the for this event was organised, before it was started, and he that's why I think triggered the invite. But so we looked at these technologies to see which things actually potentially may have accessibility pitfalls in them, and it strikes me that it's very important, I think, that those working in those technologies certainly start to research and look towards what are the potential stumbling blocks from the accessibility point of view of these technologies if they're not correctly deployed. So it's or correctly designed. So it's very much looking at the design, because our experience has been to date that most technologies are rolled out as soon as it's technically feasible and looks economically viable. These things are just rolled out, and accessibility is not considered at the time. It certainly used to be the case. And then there's an enormous cost of actually having to re-engineer those technologies to make it, to address the issues of all the people they've managed to disable by not looking at the accessibility issues inherent in those technologies. So I would say that trying to study potential technologies that are likely to be becoming perhaps more mainstream in the near future, and seeing what are the potential pitfalls from the accessibility point of view and how those may be mitigated. I think work in that area would be particularly valuable.
Thank you very much. This is where accessibility does you in. I actually type EN 301549 so many times that I have a hotkey that just types it for me. When I went to say it, I got halfway through it and go, it's just EN3. That's all it is. The rest of
yes. Yeah, I'm familiar with that problem. Yeah.
There you go. Aaron from Google. Aaron?
Yeah, I feel like we're going to have to do an Aaron and an Aaron, or just go by our last names. I don't know.
All right.
So I'm going to give the weird answer, right? Because that's my favorite thing to do. I feel like there's two perspectives on the research agenda coming from a company like Google. One is very much in alignment with what Aaron Steinfeld was saying around, is there a way that we can make an argument for the generalizability of this technology, where we can attract curb cut users? And that's one of the better ways to get buy-in and to actually get things out into the market in a way that is actually affordable and accessible to a wide group of people. Yes, and for particular groups, and like the big influential tech companies like places like Google or Microsoft or Amazon, or like other big spaces, I think we actually have kind of an obligation to look at the margins and not just the generalizability, because we have the resources theoretically to do that. We're being recorded, so I won't say anything else about that specifically, but I think that the way forward for the research agenda is that we need to actually engage the people who have the most to benefit and who also have the most potential to experience harm as we think about these future interfaces. And so participatory, as much as humanly possible, actual co-design with individuals who would eventually be the recipients of these pieces of technology. And, thinking about that in a way in which, not just for disability, but I mean, any historically excluded or systemically oppressed population that can potentially be impacted by this, whether that's socioeconomic, whether it's disability, whether it's race or ethnicity, and thinking about how do we engage those communities as directly as possible in the research agenda, but in a way that's respectful, in a way that reduces the capacity to inflict trauma on them just by virtue of participating in the research process, and in a way that actually ensures that the research agenda benefits those folks. So I recognize that in the technology space, there's this kind of need or this appeal to make it as generalizable as possible because that's how things get picked up. But I think we also have an obligation to ensure that the voices of the people who, like I said, stand to have, the benefit and the harm of the technology be as closely intertwined as possible. I'd love it if that started with the employment of folks with disabilities, more so in the tech industry, but you can't move to the left as fast as you like most of the time. I'll stop there.
I think that's really excellent. And it actually reminds me of a comment that Christian made in an earlier panel. And those that benefit most must also be those that are most harmed. And for example, automatic captioning, those that will most benefit will be people who are deaf. But if when they talked about in everybody knows what telephone relay services, right, where you can, people who are deaf, depending upon people typing what the other people are saying. And so early on, as soon as we started seeing voice recognition, people started saying, hey, why don't we just put that in instead? Then the conversations are completely private and blah, blah. But it was not good enough. And so early adoption would be devastating to them, even though in the long run, it's going to be of great benefit to them. So involving the people that would benefit most might also be the people that are harmed most if it's not mature enough before people decide to switch to it because it's better, faster, cheaper. Well, forget the better, faster, cheaper kind of a thing. But it also raises a topic which we'll have to capture, which is that benefiting one might harm another. And we need to be keeping that both in mind so that we can figure out how to mitigate that. It's always the toughest when there is a compromise where helping one seems to put something else at a disadvantage. Okay, I'm going to then jump to Mary at Microsoft, Mary Ballard, to give a sort of a parallel perspective also from industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And agree with lots of the comments that have already been said. I'll start with in thinking about how research works at Microsoft, how engineering within product works at Microsoft. I think the biggest opportunity for a characteristic of a research agenda is what do people with disabilities want? And that kind of touches a little bit on what Mike was saying, is like, rather than accessibility being an afterthought of some existing technology that's in the market, it's kind of how can research kind of drive what the technology is in the market, because of the opportunities that a person with a disability can benefit from, can highlight, can make real, right? So the utility of technology within the disabled experience itself should weigh very, very heavily on sort of the priorities within the agenda itself. The second thing is that people with disabilities are involved. So this echoes some of what Erin said also. and you know, if you're at a university and you're building out your research agenda, like how are your students are involved, not just as participants, but as leaders, as designers, as influencers, as many different types of roles and responsibilities as possible, because disabled talent is part of how all of this stays real and relevant, and I think pushes the needle the furthest in making technology work better for the human. And then I think the last piece is just kind of the characteristics of disabilities across segments. So oftentimes when we're starting conversations with a research team, you know, the idea of physical accessibility might make sense. Digital accessibility has there's a bit of a jump between the two. And when we think about disability at Microsoft, we have multiple segments. Neurodiversity is one of them. Mental health is one of them. We also are exploring co-occurring disabilities and also layered identities. And so, you know, in the spirit of kind of the wish list of what a research agenda would look like, it would be touching on more of those layered concepts. Again, in a proactive way, not just how do we fix what's out there now, but how do we shape what comes next?
Excellent. Hernisa, would you speak next?
Sure. Thanks, Greg, and hi, everyone. So I'm actually gonna take on the word that Mary just mentioned, proactive, is in my notes. I was thinking, if we are pitching a future agenda, I think we have to go with a mixed strategy one that has short-term goals that we really want to meet and we need to address, and more longer-term goals. And within those short-term goals, which is, you know, being responsive of the world that we currently are in, I have things like, you know, Mike touched a little bit on this, and many folks, and I think the whole purpose of this workshop is, let's see what is, you know, where is technology going, and then let's see kind of what, you know, where can we see the harm, potential biases and things like that, and then quickly, you know, kind of fix and meet, you know, fill those gaps immediately. And Mary mentioned, like, you know, well, maybe we can take this technology, again, this is within the, you know, responsive of the current world that we're in, maybe we can take these advances in technology that's happening, and maybe we can create novel assistive technologies with them so we can leverage them. But if we want to go into this proactive, overall proactive or futuristic world, I think Erin touched a little bit on this, where, and, you know, previous speakers today, where we want a change in culture, could be in one approach. Here we can say everyone gets to learn about accessibility in high school or earlier. Kind of similar to computing, and not only in computer sciences, but, you know, you can think of it across, you know, you can think a college of accessibility, but also this being, you know, across the education. And there you can say everyone who identifies as disabled is also not just able to consume content or technology, right? Not as a consumer, but everyone is able to create. So that is one future. And Yuta has been, and Rua before have been touching a little bit of that. And then I saw another approach, and that I think Greg, you and Sina were kind of like pushing us, which is, well, let's see of a future world where, you know, we don't put the pressure on the people creating the technology to make it accessible. We don't put the pressure on the, you know, disabled community to like know everything and to create technology that, you know, is going to make things accessible for them. But we're going to somehow, you know, going to put this, you know, infobot in the middle that's going to, you know, solve the problems for, you know, in both cases. I see, you know, I see in many people here, you know, cost and like, you know, shared cost and burden in every single approach. But I would say that if we want to put an agenda forward, whoever's working in this field should have like a short term and a longer term, and have an idea of what is this longer term that we are, image that we are going with. Is this cultural shift? Or is it a world where, you know, something intermediate is going to come and help us all and meet us where we are at our particular capabilities? and resources. So yeah, I would say a research agenda that kind of like decides what to weight in, that would be an interesting approach. And then I can have more examples in each of those, but I want to make sure that everyone has some time to talk.
Excellent. And Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean Takun from North Carolina Central University. And there's two areas of the research agenda that are somewhat tied that I'm very interested in. And the one part being the access to being able to innovate whatever comes next. I feel like oftentimes my domain of specialty is visual impairments and assistive technology. And I'm fairly confident the previous speaker will not remember my name, although we have talked. I think that there's a dilemma in that we tend to come at these accessibility issues from a backward solution standpoint. And I've heard a lot of talk around putting accessibility first, but there's a deeper engineering problem whenever you're building anything accessible, that the coding, the data, the interfaces, all of these things need to be accessible to any additional technologies or to the user. And so it begs a question that what information or controls will be exposed and available to be shared in a different way, right? To be translated from audible to visual, from visual to tactile, as it were. And I think that's something that goes deeper. I know we've talked a lot about UX design, and a lot of people have talked about putting that user design first. But there is that deeper kind of dilemma where people don't want to expose their code. They don't want to provide more tethers into what they're doing. And yet to be able to develop something like, say, virtual reality or augmented reality accessibility, you're going to need to leave a lot of tethers loose that would allow you to create custom interfaces. I find VR to be one of the least challenging things for visual impairment accessibility, because I'm a former World of Warcraft player. And World of Warcraft players can create add-ons that will locate a monster or a spawn or something at a given metric direction in a given area, will give me warnings on what's occurring to my character. And all of this can be custom constructed, which means within the VR environment, if it's properly constructed, again, all of that same accessibility can be provided to these brilliant coders who want it and want to code it for how they want to interface with it. So I think it's an important part of the research agenda is identifying what's going to be not accessible in terms of to the individual, but accessible in terms of the solutions developer. And that's just a big part of it. And my other lagging question always is, where do I fit in? I work in the field of visual impairments training professionals. For orientation and mobility, I do research in transportation. We look at the accessibility of street corners. A lot of times people ask the consumer, but people forget to ask, is there a special way you're holding your cane that automated vehicle might recognize to know whether or not you're making a crossing? And so that there are critical trainings that are happening within specialized fields that could inform and could actually shorten the adoption and the accessibility of things by just asking, hey, what are you guys already doing?
Thank you. All right, I'm going to paste into chat because we're going to move into an open format and open it up so anybody from any panel can join if they wish, turn on their camera and join in. I'm also just posted to the chat a link to the document, and this may be dangerous, but I've posted it to everyone, so everybody on the webinar can see that at the top I've tried to grab the comments that you have, and I actually made it so you not only can see it, but you can actually go in and propose edits and comments. So as we're going on, everybody on the webinar is invited to add your thoughts because we won't have time to go in and do it. If you have a comment, just use the comment, which is insert comment, or it's a command option M or a control option M, I think, on a PC. And if you have a suggestion for a topic, you can go ahead and put it in. I want to start first by talking about the major areas, and then underneath them there are bullets that we can put down for specific things that you think would be specific topics, but I want to make sure we cover the areas. So I'm just going to briefly review them. The picking up from today, from the things in, first of all, we talked about over the conference that we have several people suggested that we have research that mainstream needs to do. There's no sense for us to be trying to get separate funding for disability funding to increase speech recognition, for example. And we even would like to have mainstream solve the problem of speech recognition by everybody with all different types of accents, including dysarthric speech or the speech that would characterize individuals who learn to speak without being able to hear, and have that done as a part of the mainstream research agenda, if you will. And then the second one is accessibility. And this is stuff that really has to do with where things that from people who have expertise. So consumers, people that work in the disability field, what is it that they need to be funded to develop in addition to the mainstream? And then the third one is ethics, justice, and bias. And on this one, that's a huge area, and it's somewhat beyond the scope of the people we have here. There are other people that have much better expertise in that, but I wanted to make sure that we included it. And maybe what we end up doing is identifying research agendas that people who have really focused on that and citing them rather than trying to duplicate them. But I want to make sure that we got that part covered. You don't have to identify yourself on the comments, but if you wish to, that's fine. If we have questions, but oops, somebody had a comment and disappear. Oh, it came back. Good. So if you log into Google or Google Docs and you put your comments in, then your comments will be identified. If you don't log in and you put it in, then it will show up as anonymous, and both of them are welcome. So the topics, again, from mainstream, we had artificial, XR, AR, VR, direct brain interfaces, machine vision. These were some that we had identified, looking for other ones that that are not on there, maybe from yesterday's discussion. In the disability area, again, taking from the thing, we have DBI, XR, VR, cognitive, alternative visions for the future, better mechanisms for accessibility at source, which is something that came out of the previous discussions. And that is that, all of this, we talked about using all of this technology to provide better assistive technologies, but if you will, things that you can apply after the fact, but could it also be used to make it easier for people to make it accessible out of the box? So that was a new topic. And then under ethics, justice, and bias were three things in the last category. So let me throw it open first to see if there's other major topic areas that people think of that we should make sure that we are including in the research agenda. Vint, I see your hand up, and Aaron.
Yeah, I have a long list, which I won't read out. I'll try to put it into the document. But there are a couple of points that came up during the course of our discussion that I think somehow we need to capture. One of them is finding either platforms or libraries or something that are enabling and that are widely available. so that people have ready access to making use of those tools as they explore possible ways of making things more accessible. So doing something which is mutually reinforcing because it's collaborative and multiple people can take advantage of other people's contributions. So it seems like we should be thinking about that. I see that you carefully made the Google Doc not editable directly, so that's good. We will destroy anybody's input.
Yes, I made
comment.
it.
Yeah,
You
that's
can edit
good.
it all you want to, but you can't. You can add, you cannot subtract.
Cannot subtract,
You
and
can
that's
suggest, you can correct, but yes.
so that's
Oh,
one.
Vint, one other thing quickly. At the very bottom, I put free form thoughts. For example, the long list you have, you go, oh, I don't know how to stick this in. If you have a list, you can just paste it below the free form thoughts at the bottom. You don't have to, figure out how to sort it into the categories that are already there or something. Back to you, Vin.
Yeah, well, just one other thing. I kind of tried to allude to it, and I didn't know whether I got the concept across very well. I talked about it, PowerPoint for accessibility. What I was trying to convey by that is a set of tools that allow people to create accessible content from the get-go. In fact, the point about multiple modalities, I thought was very well taken. The notion that you might simultaneously be entering text and having the system automatically generate audio versions of what you were typing. And so they're just available somewhere, that you could invoke at need. Or just if you're putting in diagrams or something just generates the description of what that diagram is for purposes of blind people ingesting what the diagram is trying to say. So this sort of creation of tools for creation of accessible content seems like it should be somewhere in our agenda.
I think that was the better mechanisms for accessibility at source.
Yeah, that certainly belongs there. Yes.
Okay. Was you thinking of, did I miss it? Was there something else in your thought?
No, I think that's fine. And I'll go enter something in there to draw attention to that.
Okay. Aaron.
Thanks. So I want to reinforce something that Judah pointed out yesterday about her colleague who pushes a wheelchair backwards and how autonomous vehicles couldn't recognize her. I come from the Robotics Institute. I actually worked on autonomous vehicles before I came to robotics many years ago. And one of the things that really distinguishes robotics, and for that matter, a lot of AI and machine learning, is inflexibility to edge cases, things that are outside on the far edges of the distribution. It's very hard to encode. It's very hard to know what to do for those situations. And the field is trying to do better about this, but the big challenge is that there's a need for good data to both train and then to subsequently test and simulate against to ensure that the systems are not getting caught up on the things that are on the far edges of the distribution. There are efforts to improve this. I have seen some stuff in the computer vision space, for example. There's this new project that Illinois, the Speech Accessibility Project, to try and tackle speech recognition. I see some companies in there. And there's other situations where, so for example, in our group, we collect natural data and then we try to introduce changes to it to see what happens in the systems in terms of benchmarking performance. That's more on the robotic side of things. But the core point here is that the vast majority of the data that is collected by the major players is, shall we say, closer to the middle of the distribution. And there is a place and a part for governments, companies, and whatnot to get involved in making those distributions richer and include more representations of people with disabilities, so that those edge cases and those things that look unusual to systems trained up on the broader distributions are handled safer and more accurately. I'm sure Judah will follow up on this or give more data on this, but this is a point that I think we can't just rely on better speech recognition or better computer vision. We have to actually also get the training and the evaluation improved as well.
Okay, excellent. So I tried to add it under the agenda, better mechanisms for handling data at the edges. I also said, what about the person with idiopathic condition? We talk about people on the edges as if they're, like, well, we just have to put a whole bunch of more data about that group of people. And every time I think of this, I see us falling into the same trap of, we think of people with disabilities as, well, that's not true. Blind people as, well, that's not true. We really need to be thinking of the edges. If you have any ideas, by the way, we want to have the general challenges in here. If you have ideas specifically for how to go about doing it, then that's something we also want to capture as we go forward, because the funding agencies, again, are looking for not just, well, you need to do more good research about people with disabilities and accessibility so that it's easier and works for more people. Well, it doesn't help them, it doesn't, the more specific the question, especially what I find is universities are full of a bunch of very, very bright, talented graduate students that are looking for topics, things to work on. And if we can give them a targeted topic to focus on, that even mainstream researchers who don't know anything about disability say, oh, if this would be something that, would that really be helpful, that would be fantastic. They would love to do stuff that would benefit us. They just don't think that they either have the time or the talent or the skill or whatever to do anything competent in our area. So they, stay out of our area, which sometimes you can get them in by a camel, was a camel nose in the tent, but backwards. They get their foot in the door and we end up pulling them in. Other topics, areas of research that you think might be captured. And by the way, if you mentioned one and you didn't see me capture it on here, come in and stick it, because I'm trying to listen to it, but I'm sometimes when you get done, I'm going, I don't think I quite understood what the person was getting at. So don't be shy about popping your stuff in. Okay, other major topics, and I also should look in the chat to see if people are popping things in there.
Andreas here.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, you got your hand up here. It's go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's I brought it up a few times, but I don't know if we need to make it a subcategory, but there's, I have to sort of say a couple of, maybe it's unpopular things, but if you look at some of the conversations that are being had now, like at the Enabling Summit in DC last year, and thinking about DEI, right? And then saying, do we want to append A to DEI, or is A just embedded into diversity, equity, and inclusion? When you start to look at that, there's been a lot of economic analysis on the diversity side, gender, race, things like this. So there's been a lot of financial modeling around the size of, say, the Latinx market, or example, or the LGBTQ market and things like this, and saying, wow, this is a really big market. And so if we think about, is there research that could go into shifting accessibility from quote unquote doing good to good business? I think we'll also see a shift, right? And we're starting to see that a little bit with some organizations like Valuable 500 and others who are trying to make public pledges and commitments and quantify some of the impacts that are being made. So I think, if there's an area to be able to quantify impact in some of these areas, specifically, most of what companies get behind is quality of life, but very few sort of quantify the economic impact. So the economic impact for the individual, the economic impact for their household, or the economic impact for their community at large. And so the ability to make money as an individual or save money as a family by having, access to safe, effective access methods could have a dramatic impact, right? So thinking about the systemic natures of that, whether you're dealing with peds with like in a K-12 environment or special ed, and looking at graduation rates, or being able to look at admission percentages increasing for individuals with disabilities at higher ed. So starting to look at what are the measures that matter, that can quantify better accessibility solutions to things that matter to social impact measures. I think that's an area that's really important and could use some academic horsepower. Another one I think we talked about, which was around situational awareness. So thinking about this, not necessarily just as context awareness for AT, but thinking about, 100% of the world is situationally disabled in one way or another at a certain time. It could be you're at a restaurant, it's just too loud, right? There's lots of things that can put any of us into a situation where we might want our consumer devices or other methods to up their capability, right, given the situation. And it would be really cool if you all could look at those mass market or sort of mainstream opportunities that cause people to be situationally disabled, and then align those to situations where people are chronically in a similar situation, and start to say, could we identify a bit of a landscape of opportunities where you could have extremely meaningful universal design thrusts or initiatives, right? Overall, that could start to do what, I'm not sure if it was Aaron, if you were saying this, right? But around just how do you make sure that you're lowering the bus step, right? And it's good for everyone, right? And the way that gets justified isn't just because we get more people with disabilities on the bus, it's that we get productivity gains, efficiency gains, reduction in safety risks and falls and claims and all kinds of other things. So it could be cool to say, like, from a universal design perspective, where are the really amazing opportunities given what we have on deck? Because over the last day and a half, I can take in a lot, but I'm a bit overwhelmed with just the variety of things that we've all covered. It's really phenomenal. But ultimately, I think it's a signal to noise issue around where we make our investments, right? And say, well, of all the noise, where's the signal for the opportunities to really make a huge difference? I think that's where the collective here in this community could probably help out. One other thing, broader access. So the broader term of access. So I work in the realm of AAC, and less than 3% of the worldwide population that needs AAC actually has it. Less than 3%, right? Like, that's absurd. I think something like 7 to 10% even knows what AAC is or if it's available. So, areas of education and advocacy and last mile access to solutions, or easier, more streamlined ways to get apps onto your devices or however you need to, seems like a huge, low-hanging fruit, right, for us to be able to do something about. And I'd say a few other things that were really specific that I think would be interesting from a research agenda perspective. Internet of Everything. So this idea of moving from IoT to IoE. If you look at the world around us, objects are getting embedded with all kinds of sensors, and there's an abundance of this, where trillions of devices are going to be surrounding us. But they're all serving kind of a very narrowly defined functional purpose. But if in a world of AR and VR, it sure would be nice if all of those devices were identifiable on the network, all of them had attributes, either passive or active. So if you see a door, you have passive or aesthetic attributes, but you might have active attributes. So if that door happens to be motorized, it sure would be nice to be able to interact with it, right? So is there a global tagging sort of crowdsourcing, like almost a, like a CAPTCHA kind of thing, where like, could we find ways to be able to help tag objects or give attributes to objects so that they are more interactable? I think is kind of akin to Hiroshi's Matterverse concept. Oh, and one of the last things, and it's, I think we have these weird, sort of this paradox of more and more prolific access to the internet with 5G and 6G and so on, edge computing, but still so many people don't have access to the internet, or if they do, they have disconnection problems. So one of the things that's super important, especially as we're working on things like BCI or other kinds of like augmented communication, it's a requirement that the core capabilities of the service or features or functionality works independent of an internet connection. So I think it's really important to be able to have everything work on device, or as much of the core functionality work on device as possible, which forces a lot of change and advances in processing, battery power, compute power, algorithms that can run on resource constrained devices.
Thank you. I'm madly typing away here trying to capture your ideas as you do. So Aaron is still here. Yes. I think it was Aaron who I was having a discussion with someone just the other day about we now have the mapping, the ability, you can walk everywhere, and with LiDAR and stuff, we don't need to map things like we did before. But maybe we could do a Pokemon approach to not only mapping, make it a GAND, and then also to but also for tagging, so that, as you said, as you walked up to a door, if it was a power door or whatever else, without putting 10,000 stickers on everything, a person could say, let me know any of these things that are tagged with like a motorized doors and something that some people care about very much, but other people it's critical. And they would, map out a path, and they would want to know, and they could appear with affordance stickers, if you would, on them. So that's an interesting thought. Judith, go ahead.
So that's fine. And in fact, Andreas made the point about economic and the economic modeling agenda. I would add to that the system or service lifespan and the brittleness of a system that is not considering accessibility and the full range of potential users from the start is part of that. Certainly, we've done some early modeling here in Ontario, and we found that if there was any investment that was worthwhile, ensuring access for a government to invest, but also for a service or a company to invest, there are huge economic gains. And this was done by a hugely conservative, fiscally conservative economic research group. So I think that would be good to do, and to also look at integrated versus segregated assistive technologies. And I take the point that Christian and Greg have made about that this might be impossible, but I think if we were to push further in showing the economic gains of that for both the company and for a public service or a public administration, that we may get further participation by the mainstream companies in that, which would increase interoperability, decrease the cost of such a vision, etc. I wanted to just contest or question the idea that the people here are not the experts to get involved in ethics, because I think that trust and adoption need to be addressed by us. and that the AI ethics groups are ignoring or not. I mean, the majority of the AI ethics efforts are really not attending to the types of ethics issues that we are seeing. It's largely based upon cluster analysis of or confusion analysis of bounded groups. And the issue here is that people with disabilities are so diverse. There's no way to define a particular cluster for comparison, or to be able to determine that this is the element that causes the discrimination. So it's something that requires special attention. And as you mentioned, people with disabilities tend to be the individuals that are most at harm to the effects of these technologies. In terms of the thank you, Erin, for bringing up the edge or the outlier situation. The point that I want to add to that is that we need to go beyond just filling the data gap to looking at how we use the algorithms, what we optimize. So even if we were to have full proportional representation of people with disabilities in the data systems, we would still be biased against because of it goes towards the mean, right? So some of the things that we've been experimenting with are, and as a very, very, very oversimplistic example, people know about word clouds. Well, word clouds take the most popular thing and increase the size and put it into the middle. What we've done is we've inverted that so that you see the novel unexpected items. And that seems to prompt people to think about, well, what are we missing in terms of by the popularity echo chambers that we have, or the fact that that we're always privileging the fact that you are like the rest of the population. And Greg is probably familiar with my lawnmower of justice algorithm, where what I do is I prevent the more than a certain number of repeats of any data element, such that the learning model needs to attend to a much broader range of items and optimize towards a greater range. But even that is still reverting to the mean. But it gives some greater emphasis to those outliers and edge scenarios. I'll put the rest into the document.
Thanks. So I added two things to you to see if I captured it. We need disability ethics justice bias because they're not being handled by the general ethics justice bias. We need to work with the other groups, but they cannot depend on them to solve our issues. They are different in many ways, or we are different in many ways, I guess we could say. That's a really good point. My comment was that if we want to talk about ethics, justice, and bias, the particular group that we gathered for this conference includes some of the people, but there are many, many of us that are not as versed in that as there are other people, even in the disability area. But I think it's really good to note that if we think of the general ethics justice bias as handling it's likely not. So I'm going to look to those of you who have looked at this within the disability area to help shape that particular area. And so it is, we're going to have, it's one of three equal, if you will. I don't know which ones will be bigger and larger in terms of size, but they're three equal in heading level, if you will. They're all top level is mainstream, disability and this, but we have to rename the disability if this is going to be part of disability as well. Let's see. We had Hernisa, and then Erin, and then Christine. Thank you.
I want to touch a little bit on what Andreas and Yuta mentioned in terms of like quantifying the economic impact that including disability could have. It's unfortunate that we have to live in a world where, we have to make a case that, it benefits you to include people with disability and have to make the economic argument. But let's go with the world that we're in. One thing that I'm very excited about relates to data source from people with disabilities, so the disability community. I know that Yuta mentioned, echoed that, include, having a larger representation and meeting that representation gap is not enough. And I agree, but one way you can see this data is not just like in terms of like training the algorithms, but also providing evidence when this algorithm fail, or also like what is that, what is better learning that they have to do. One thing I'm very passionate about is how do we compensate the disability community? I think we should start this conversation very early on. Up to now, there is this assumption that, if you are disabled and you're contributing data, you will do this just to benefit other people that, might identify disabled as you or the broader disability community. But we see more and more with our participants when we're having these conversations that they want to be, compensated for the it takes a much more time.
Sorry, you dropped out. They want to be compensated for?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my headset battery.
Okay, they want to be compensated for? Oops, now we're not getting you at all. You have to put them inside your butt in the case. I think they're still linked.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so we're seeing from the disability community when we talk to them that they want to be compensated about the time that they spend on their data. And I think there are ways that we can work together with folks in AI to show that there is a lot of value from data source from people with disability, both in terms of like maybe the algorithms are learning better or something, or even when these data are deemed as low value, oftentimes, at least we have found so far anecdotally, is that the annotations were of low quality, not the data themselves. And so I'm really interested in these ideas. How can we, quantify the impact of data sourced from the disability community and the value they can bring in the AI community broader? And tied with that, I see, this was, Marshall mentioned this yesterday, one of the challenges with AI right now we have, or at least some of the computer vision models, is that it's very hard for them to know when they don't know. So not operating very well in the open world assumption. And this is very critical for the disability community, especially when the technology, they have no way to verify, right? So if you're blind and you have a computer vision system that you rely on, there's no way for you to verify the output of that system. And I think it also, in this case, it can push the machine learning community a bit forward on like, how would you, if not approximate, the fact that you don't know, but how could you relay information to someone who has no way to verify it? What kind of information can you relay to them for them to be able to decide whether they should trust that or not to make that decision? So I'm excited about these two directions.
Could you see the last one? I didn't capture that. It sounds like data trust, but I wasn't. What's the research question?
Right, so the research question is maybe we can work on machine learning explainability. So that in cases where you have a machine learning model, someone is operating it to augment their abilities and they have no way to verify its output. And we know now that for machine learning, it's very challenging to say, I actually don't know that I don't know this. Like they would just, spit something out most of the cases. Then, we have some approximations of figuring out some uncertainty perhaps, but there's, so far it's still a big challenge. I think it can move the field forward, both benefit the accessibility community, but also the AI community, figuring out ways to allow the user, someone who's a human who cannot verify the output of the machine learning model to make a decision whether they should trust it or not.
Okay, so and that sounds like a real mainstream topic with disability implications, right? Okay, sorry, next is Aaron with an E.
Yeah, thanks. So I had a couple of things that I wanted to circle back to, and actually something that Risa just said made me think of a second thing. So going back to some of the things that Andreas and Yuta were talking about in terms of like the actual accessibility of these interfaces and technologies that we might develop in terms of, we talked about, do people actually have access to the types of devices that support these things? And then what are the sort of life cycles of technology systems within their communities and things of this nature? Something else that I wanted to talk about just briefly and make sure that we really capture intentionally is that awareness of accessibility features or the ability to personalize or take advantage of this is actually already kind of a problem. Like loads of people just don't think about, they don't identify with a disability, they haven't been diagnosed with a disability, they don't necessarily understand what disability settings or accessibility settings would do for them. And so, wanting to understand how best can we make sure that people are aware that devices can offer these things if they want them, and how learnable are they is just as important as how potentially fancy they could be or whether or not they show up in certain types of devices. And so just really thinking about how do we ensure that people know that this is available to them? And part of that solution might be making it a component in the broader personalization dialogue, where just you have a device and it gets to know you and it offers you the settings and services that benefit you based on how you functionally interact with the device. But are there other avenues that we need to explore in terms of teaching people that this is available or ensuring that they can learn these things? Folks with disabilities often take on a tremendous amount of burden in terms of learning, new systems, learning assistive technology, and also figuring out workarounds when they don't work well for them. So that's one piece. And then the second piece is around compensating folks who participate in research. I feel like we don't pay enough attention to this. Judah said something really prescient in the chat that I have lost and would have read out loud, but effectively, research has a long history of kind of swooping into communities and sucking up their data and then disappearing. And the communities may or may not see the benefits of that turning up in the outcomes of the research. And so we have the very literal compensation of their time and their lived experience and their expertise and knowledge, but we also just have this sort of need to maybe be more transparent about what we're doing with your data, what we're doing with your research engagement, and communicating the ways in which they're actually able to have an impact on the technology that they work on. So in thinking about the research agenda, are there ways that we can be more transparent about the progress or the way that we're representing their data, or ensuring that these folks feel like the time spent working with us is worth it? So that's all.
That strikes me as a little bit of an echo of people with disabilities want to be compensated for their data. And one way of compensating is, well, there's money. There is feedback. If you can take my data, at least tell me what's being done with it, and then benefit. If it can actually benefit the people that are providing the data. It reminds me of the woman whose blood was solving all these problems, and they didn't even tell her or compensate nobody benefited except everybody else. Did I capture that last part, Erin?
Yeah, I think so. Just ensuring that we're transparent with these communities and these individuals about how we're using their data, how we're using the research, and what progress we're actually making in an effort to address the concerns and things that they have. So I could go into the document and add my own words.
Excellent, thank you. I would really appreciate that. Sometimes people comment and then they don't come back and add it, so I'm trying to grab it. But everything that I do is an attempt to grab what you have. If you have more to say, put it in. If I captured it wrong, either correct it or add your thing along. If I captured, well, that's a good thought, but that's not what I was saying. Make sure you get yours in there. Let's see, Christine, then Kathy, then Aaron.
Hi, Greg. Hi, everyone. Thank you. What a fabulous couple of days. My brain is tired. It's midnight here, so please, I have cognitive diversity right now. So be kind as I share my points, but I've put them in the chat and tried to be as clear as I can. A couple that come from Larry, because he's got a meeting now. One, he mentioned around image recognition technology. So really, using the technology that exists today to generate contextual image. And that could be anything from educational materials, live pre-produced productions, places where images are not well described today. So we've heard that a number of times through the course of today, but really particularly very areas that probably won't be got to make them more accessible for a while otherwise. Also neurodivergent and cognitive diversity. I would totally echo this, that there's such a broad range of different types of thinking and severities and impacts of that, and the under engagement there is probably more substantial than many other areas of human diversity. So there, Larry, is a couple of others. From the conversation today, one thing I really took from that was balancing the shared tension of short-term practicalities versus long-term ambitions, and not giving up on either of these. So we heard from Dylan and from Pilar some really practical short-term things we can do right now to make it easier right now. Icons, earcons, code snippets. These are the use the language of one of my team, the kind of, she loves progress over perfection. They give us progress right now, but I would say hold that in tension and in appropriate tension with the long-term ambitions that we've been hearing as well. So moving between these two in the research and recognizing that there's different time horizons that research is running to and different levels of ambition that it can support. Creating collaborative places and spaces for shared learning such as this, but also such as the GitHub that Dylan mentioned. One that I'd really share, which goes along with what a number of the colleagues have just been talking about then, is really expanding the concept of what it means to be human and what it means to have a disability or disabilities. No jam jars, no labels, no this little group over here that would be particularly, that you can solve in one part of potentially their whole needs. So recognizing, so I don't know if you meant to share that, Greg, you were sharing screen there.
I meant to try and share it. So as I'm trying to type things down, so as people are talking, they can see where their thoughts are going and can go back and correct them. So yes.
Oh, that's okay. I've actually dropped mine in under the XR one higher up, if you'd like to go up there, because
I noticed that you did a very nice job up here.
yeah, feel free to. Sorry, I'm just gonna. I've just lost my screen. One moment. Yeah, so that concept of human, and we've just heard that in terms of identities too, from Erin. Not everyone identifies as disabled. Not everyone identifies as a single characteristic. Many of us have multiple characteristics that co-occur, different identities, and actually the multiple marginalization of different other marginalized characteristics that can significantly change where failure occurs and how profound that failure is. Fewer assumptions that go with that, just as we have, we're saying fewer assumptions around people in general, fewer assumptions around solving for different needs. I loved the conversation just had around expanding the concept of experts and expertise. Erin, absolutely fair compensation. We are a research organisation that 100% of the research we do is paid research to the community we engage with, including when we're just asking questions that are relevant to us. But that recognising that people are experts, they are bringing their expertise, and we're seeing actually interestingly large brands that are picking up on purpose. There's a little bit more risk right at the moment than less risk, because they're wanting to kind of showcase that they have DEI, occurring within their business, and they're almost wanting that showpiece as opposed to deep engagement, change, and fair value. So making sure that that value is shared and that expertise is recognised as what it is, expertise fueling better solutions. Using tech to solve human problems, not humans to solve tech problems. There's so much exciting tech, and we've had 2 days of my brain being fried by amazing and exciting tech. But all of this is tools. It's only about as exciting as, a screwdriver if it's not used to solve a human problem. It's just a tool. it can be incredibly powerful as a tool to solve human problems and human needs, but we always need to put the human problem and human need at the center of it, not the technology. And recognizing that the impact of technology can happen in different places that can have quite different consequences. So I've just thrown a few of them in here, but it can land in educational cost or employment cost or health cost, civil rights, retail cost, the increasing cost of disability, even hedonistic cost, just having fun, inequitable distribution of fun is still a real cost on communities. So just recognizing where that cost lands. Something that
These are in here now, someplace?
Yep, they're in there. Yes, they're all in there. We were talking about previously about the business value of this. I think that is absolutely enormous. We work with large organizations that are looking to be large organizations generating great value. This is one of the most underserved communities for many organizations that they are not yet solving the needs of. If we can help do some research to quantify the why, that will generate a lot of work to solve the what and the how. So, a little bit more work to help organizations understand the ROI of inclusion and understand that this is an enormous market that is significantly undersolved and underserved today. This is a very North American conference. I'm here as one of the representatives from out of country, but still Anglophone, still white, still wealthy, still have 5G sitting on my phone. So really saying, how can our research think about how these solutions get out beyond what is essentially the minority of world users into the majority of world users that don't have all those characteristics in play. A range of different ways that solutions, so human to human, human to computer, blah, blah, blah. As an example, the human to human, we worked in Metaverse for a major brand last year. And one of the things that really came through that is how people see themselves. So it's not just technical accessibility, but emotional accessibility, and that sense of being seen and being able to have avatars that people wish to have that represent them in the way that they wish to be represented. But also the narratives within that are more disability inclusive than exclusive. One thing I heard a couple of times yesterday and today, and we've certainly seen in the work we've done, is that people with disabilities will sometimes trade off privacy or security for accessibility. That's got a cost too. And being really conscious of where we're putting safety and security costs into people's lives that they're trading off for accessibility. I think this is particularly important as we go into more and more immersive experiences that we know have greater emotional connection, that if you've put people at risk, there's more of their emotion invested in that, therefore there's more risk of harm that goes along with that. Fair and effective feedback systems. Again, we've been talking about how we can have more user expertise fueling systems, fueling design as it emerged. As Larry said, we don't know where this is going, but we know that people know what their needs are and that they can describe it. So having that feedback cycle that when something new gets put out there, the organization that puts it out there can listen very quickly to a very broad range of people, not, if they've got a small co-creation group, that they can step out beyond that into that first user group and learn fast and correct what's not working. I think that's, and the other thing is, we talk about accessibility, but I've kind of just mentioned there's a range of different ways in which consequences of inaccessibility can flow. We're hearing earlier about from Jutta about, the learnability, adaptability, not just to suit me today, but to suit across different contexts or across me tomorrow as well. So the adaptability, practicality, security and safety we've mentioned, flexibility, so consistency across contexts and tasks, and reliability. If we're swapping out services or products and solutions that exist today for new services, understanding the reliability of these is going to be really key too. Sorry, that is all from me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Kathy, Kathy Ponine, and then Aaron and Mike.
Thank you. Okay, so this goes under unpopular topics, most likely, and may seem a bit US centric, but I suspect it's not. And that has to do with kind of our public policy perspective on how do we help get this research funded? Because there's so much, I mean, this is the choir. Everyone here is part of the choir, but the reality is the rest of the world is not necessarily part of our choir. And how we frame this matters to the general public and to funding sources and policy decision makers. So I keep actually on my desk, it's on my desk, a reviewer comment once that you cannot measure outcomes for people with cognitive impairments. It's impossible. And that was a quote on a grant review as an example. So part of our issue is not only do we have to frame this appropriately to ensure that our federal funders are interested and willing to participate, but I think we also have to think about who's reviewing what we're proposing and how do we help to educate in a way that is meaningful those folks that are making decisions as to whether or not this research can go forward. So that's my unpopular topic for today, and a little bit off, but I thought it was important.
No, I don't think it's off at all. I will make two little data points. You said you can't measure outcome impact on people with cognitive disabilities? Is that what?
In their use of technology. Yeah, that was a direct quote, and I got a very low score from that reviewer.
No kidding.
I just want to, Andreas here, I just wanted to tag on just a little extra exclamation point on what you just said, Kathy, because what we also hear from hospital networks around individuals who are admitted into like the ICU or they're discharged, but they're unable to speak for themselves. Many of them, every patient gets a patient satisfaction survey upon discharge. And what we're learning is that a lot of people who cannot speak for themselves are excluded from receiving a discharge satisfaction survey. So like, and ironically, it's the most expensive individual to care for on the healthcare side. And so they're not hearing from those individuals about their patient experience. It's quite a conundrum.
There are two things I wanted to mention. Over the last decades, I've heard, like NIH, NSF, well, we need to double their budget. We actually did, I think, that once or twice, or add 50% to it or whatever. But the NIDLR, which is the disability research, has been flat funded while all of these other major research areas get cycle after cycle after cycle of increases in their funding. And I think that that's part of what you're talking about. In Europe, they had an access for all category in their research. And on the last round, they removed it. And they just said, well, we have health and we have this, we have this, we have this. And people with disabilities have health problems. They have, so, they can just, all those grants will just have a component in the corner that has to do with disability, or we'll say that you should remember people with disabilities in your grant. And we all know what that looks like in terms of funding. So how do we get the research funded? That should be a research project on that because, or why is there so little compared to others? Why is there so little? Why does it not grow at the same rate? Okay, back to the queue. Was
Greg, just chiming in on, this is Clayton, chiming in on that last point. Before, I think you or others were talking a little bit about this issue of what's mainstream and what isn't. So what was just said is a good reason to think carefully about that boundary and not too readily saying, well, that's mainstream stuff, we're not going to do that. So looking for opportunities to do work that combines high levels of mainstream interest with contributions to disabilities could be an approach to some aspects of the funding problem.
Okay, pop that in. Clayton actually was inside the government funding agency for a year. or more. And so has some sort of inside a level of expertise and understanding that the rest of us may not have around this. So any thoughts you have, Clayton, would be great. Jumping back to Q, then Aaron, then Mike.
So I wanted to follow up on 2 points. The first is the global South and developing economies have been mentioned a few times. One of my PhD students, Lynn Trabo, who's defending soon and going off to Harvey Mudd in the fall to be a professor, will quickly remind everyone, based on her own research, that you cannot just take technology here in the United States or Europe or whatever and just bring it to one of these locations. You need to incorporate the context and specifically the scenario and the population context before you do any sort of attempt to just translate something in from elsewhere. It doesn't work very well, even with this in the disability space. The other point I wanted to get at, and Rissa pointed out this notion of when AI goes wrong and the issue of explainability and understandability of what happened. There are 2 ways that you can tackle this. The first way, which we did in our tiramisu project, and it worked out very successfully, is you make the human correction of the AI's action very low cost, very easy. And by making that really easy to correct the AI and say, no, that's not what I meant, or no, change that, you really lower the negative impact of those mistakes. You make it a lot easier for the user to get some benefit out of it. So in an automatic captioning situation, an experienced caption reader will infer the correct word for the mistranslated word, for example, because they have a lot of skill and have developed that. But ideally, you want this to be as fast and easy as possible, this correction by human. And you certainly don't want to tell the human that the correction is wrong, which is actually happening in some of the newer systems. The other thing that you want to do, and this is where my robotic sponsors from the Office of Naval Research would get upset with me if I didn't chime in, is you want to incorporate the ability for these systems to do self-assessment of their own performance, ideally in real time. And if that's done well and paired with good communication with the human and correct interaction techniques, you can, again, get over these errors and mistakes. So for example, we looked at giving the ability of a robot to understand whether or not the image it was getting from the camera was of high quality or not. Was there blur in the image from motion, or was the scene underlit or overlit? And then if you can communicate that up to the human then can take corrective action and make the scene better so that the image is better. So for example, if a human is holding their phone, we've done some work in this space, you can guide the person to take a better picture or hold the camera in a better position so that your AI can get a higher performance result. And so thinking about the interaction around these situations where AI is not working correctly or just a little bit underperforming can smooth that over, because there's a human in the loop and that human is part of the system. But the key part is you have to make it easy on the human and so that the human can actually take action quickly. I'll stop so that Mike can get the last word in.
We have a little bit more time, but go ahead, Mike.
Hi there. Yeah, it was just a small point related to something Erin said, I think, about often in the software there may be things that are beneficial to a particular user if the system determines that is the case, that they could propose that they use those facilities, switch those facilities on. And I think that's right, but it has to be very well done, I think. I had nightmare scenarios for those with a long memory of Microsoft Clippy and things trying to be helpful. And in my case, I'm a bit careless with the keyboard and occasionally you get sticky keys, keeps saying, do I want to switch on sticky keys? No, I never do. So, it's... software trying to be helpful has to be done very, very carefully and very cleverly. Otherwise, it becomes an irritant rather than a benefit.
Yeah, on the sticky keys, there's a setting so that'll never pop up again.
Yeah, I'm sure I ought to use that.
And the next time it pops up, look, because I think if you're talking about Microsoft, they actually put a right on the pop-up, it says, no, and don't show me this again.
It may well do, and I may have activated. It hasn't happened for a while, but I do remember it happening rather too frequently.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Years ago, when we put sticky keys in, I actually wrote a letter to the VP for software and urged him to not make it turn on automatically, because the pushback from users would exceed the value. And then they made it so that it would, but they did, because people weren't discovering it. They did put it with this feedback, and that's an example, I think, of what you're trying to talk about, and that is they made it so that it would show up so people knew it was there, but they also made it so they could say, I don't need this, don't show it to me again. And that's the kind of thing that we need to figure out how to do in more contexts, because so many of these things people don't even know they exist. It's like Clippy, the first time he pops up, can you just tell him to go away and never come back, kind of a thing. Very good. Let's see. Have we cleared the queue? Oh, no, Vint.
Just an observation on that last point. I click here, don't show this to me again. As soon as you introduce any mechanisms like that, of course, you're now personalizing, which sounds good, but it also means a great deal of state information has to be maintained in order to remember the fact that you're not supposed to show this to that user. So just a notion about how much state and for how long do we keep that information, and are there privacy implications that arise as a consequence of that? I know it's a stretch for the don't show this to me again, but you can imagine other information that you would want to hold on to for purposes of personalization, leading to concerns about privacy.
No, that's a really excellent point, Vint. One of the things was, I think that we ought to be looking at is a mechanism for secure, trusted personalization.
This touches on another point that was made earlier, that the attempt to maintain privacy meant moving the mechanisms closer and closer to the users so that they didn't necessarily have to go out into the cloud, or if you didn't want to be dependent on the cloud, because if the internet went away, you want your system to still work. That causes you to keep moving some things closer and closer. But that also implies that a tool which is reacting to you or interacting with you needs to somehow engage or obtain access to that personalization information in order to properly respond. And so there's an interesting balance now between how does the personalized information, which is close to the user, interact with the system that's trying to be filtered through that. That's a design problem.
Yeah, somebody said, I'm sorry, her niece is in queue. I'll say it quickly then. Somebody once said that don't worry too much about personalization, because you've already lost that game. No matter how much you secured all that information, as soon as you use it once, it's like somebody who's blind wanting to be, doesn't want anybody to know they're blind. They can't leave their house, because if they walk out of their house with the cane and their dog, you can see they're blind. That there's almost nothing you can do that applies personalization that isn't detectable in some way and capturable. That bothers me. So somebody came back and said that instead of trying to prevent the spread of information, well, because it's already going to be out there, what you needed to work on is to prevent the misuse of it. And so that's something we should capture, but that's a real tough one to do. Lisa?
Yeah, I want to touch a little bit on this concept of personalization, and that I'm really excited about, especially when it comes to machine learning, technology that use machine learning. Something we've been doing in our lab is giving the opportunity to the end user to fine-tune machine learning models. I'm sure in the future, we don't need to do fine-tuning. We might have to do that in a higher level, maybe with, an underlying language model that you can have it in a conversation. But one exciting thing that I've seen there from our participants, and mostly we're working with blind participants, but also with older adults. So blind participants are fine-tuning their phones to recognize objects that they care about. So fine-grained object recognition. They don't care, if it's a glass or it's like a bottle. They can tell it by touch, but they want to know exactly the specifics of it. But one side note, it was a benefit actually, is that a lot of the participants doing this were like, oh, they were start building intuition about how machine learning kind of works, like what were good examples or bad examples, just basic concepts. But then they were like more and more willing to engage in conversations like, how do I optimize, the algorithm? I mean, humans, we love to game the system and, to make it work best for what we want to do. But that is something that I also see in terms of personalization, not just this benefit of, making it work for you, but also while you're tinkering with it, you're experimenting with it, you're kind of uncovering some basic mechanisms behind the black box. And it provides a very good opportunity for, democratizing concepts around machine learning and AI. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Can you, is there, in addition to the excited about, is there a research issue that you think that we should capture around that too? Because there are a lot of these things we get excited about. We get excited about the potential for them, but if we don't capture them and implement them. So is there a sort of a specific, you can do it later, but I'm just going to capture it now. If you had a specific sort of a research goal that you thought would help to reinforce that?
Yeah, so right now, one thing we'd like to know is, how do you design an interface that allows someone who doesn't have expertise in AI or machine learning to be able to do this? That seems tricky. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about what does it mean to train AI and how, the capabilities of AI. Like, for example, we saw some of our blind participants training like some of the spice jars on the outside, then they opened it and they took photos on like an open jar, and then they took the content of the jar on the table and they took photos of the content. And at this time, they were thinking that they were training how to recognize this particular spice jar. So they assume the AI is able to, make the connection. Which is not the case, at least not with what we have right now. But so how do we build interfaces that kind of anticipate those misconceptions with the users? That's one challenge. And the second one is that, especially if you're training technology to fulfill a particular need that you have, let's say you're blind and you want your phone or your computer vision in your phone to recognize objects for you, it's kind of hard to tell when you're doing the training wrong, because you have no visual. In this case, you have to do a visual inspection of what examples you gave it or things like that. And there's no, easy way to do that. So oftentimes when we get very bad performances, we would bring sighted people to do the same, and they would get, very high performances. When we bring blind people in, a lot of their photos, for example, might include part of their belly or like other part of the scene, and then they were thinking they were training. So of course that model is not going to perform well later on, even if they frame it correctly, if they haven't done the training in the first place very well. So there are a lot of things that we need to do there, like how do we make it for people who are disabled, but also those who don't have an AI or ML expertise to be able to build things and personalize AI in a way that suits them. And I think this can help with the edges.
I think that's really important. We've seen that if you take sighted persons to train taking pictures of soup cans and then use that to allow blind people to recognize soup cans, it doesn't work very well, because sighted people always hold the soup can perfectly for the picture. But as you said, if you do it for blind people and they did it and they aim and they take a picture of their wrist and not the can, that's not going to work either. So that's the kind of thing you're talking about. How do we create tools that allow blind people to successfully train things to work for them the way they hold them? Is that the idea you're trying to get?
Yes.
Okay, great. Ed, and we're getting close to the end here. So anybody, if you have an idea or thought, please get it framed in your mind in a short form so we can make sure we capture
Yeah,
it.
this is just a quick follow-up on Erniesa's comment there. And then I think that this notion of personalization in AI with like very low shot learning or using transformers to be able to create this is a really, really key thing that we should be pushing on, because of it really does lend. And Ernisa mentioned this almost, I think, as a throwaway near the end, of ways of expanding this out into lots of other contexts, into the global south, into places where the training sets we have do not necessarily match well. And so as a research that's looking specifically at how to expand these kinds of training sets, or these ways that we can allow our machine learning to work well in a wide variety of contexts, means that we expand out dramatically for the full heterogeneity of the people with disabilities. So that's really the key idea there.
So I wish I had one of these brain interfaces that we're talking about, where I can just think the words and I don't have to depend upon my not so great fingers. I see Christine.
Taking a moment to get back to the buttons because I was on the other screen. Just one thing, as we're thinking about research and we're talking about inclusive research, ensuring that the research itself is inclusive. We've talked about fairness. So we've talked about making sure that the research itself is fair, but also, of course, making sure that the research itself is inclusive. So designing the research process and program with the same consideration for human difference that we would any product, service, or environment. So actually designing a research space, place, protocol. We co-create that at Open with our community. So it's actually co-created with people with needs similar to those that are coming in to do the research, so that we make sure that we're spending that energy of research looking in just the right places in ways that spend the energy of the participants solving for the information we're looking for, not getting there, getting away, worrying about it, etc. And the other thing that's really helpful we've found is making sure that what we've heard is what was meant. Because of course we've all got our biases and we all pretend that as researchers we don't have biases, but we all do. So then also checking, once you've got the insights and you're doing the synthesis, going back potentially to the participants, or for us, to co-creators, and going, we heard this, we thought this is what that meant, did we synthesize that correctly? Or was there some kind of loss in interpretation because we don't have the same lived experience as those that were describing it to us? So just treating research itself with exactly the same consideration we're talking about the product, services, environments.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a cue off that to say the same thing here. Make sure that what I typed on here is what you meant to be saying. And if it's not what you meant to be saying, come in and, as I said before, correct what I wrote, or if what you said is, well, what you wrote is fine, but that's not what I meant, add it alongside as another thought. Okay, Christine, you still have your hand up? I'm going to presume that that's a hangover. Does anybody have any other final thoughts? Otherwise, we promised this would end at 6, and this has been a long day for some people, and in some parts of the world, it is extraordinarily late. So I want to end right on time. Mike over there is in the wee hours of the night. That's right. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you all for a tremendous amount. I do want to thank again the team that was behind all this. If they would come on, and Crystal, if you could just quickly introduce all the people that made all this happen, that would be fantastic. We showed you a picture yesterday, but that was just an anonymous picture. I'd like you to them to hear their names before we close.
Yeah, Greg, can you stop sharing?
Oh, yes.
Right, there's an echo on our end. All right, perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm
I'm Anna. I'm Jessica.
I'm
Ella. Hi, I'm Caroline.
I'm Baron.
Yeah, and we're the team. So glad everyone had a really great time. Nice meeting you all, and yeah,
Great conversation.
great conversations. Thank you for contributing on Discord, and thank you for everything.
Well, and thank you for all of you for making this happen. It's been quite amazing.
Greg,
Okay.
it's been just one thing that you might want to add, and that's what happens next. What will happen to all the material that we're composing? What about, I know a lot of this is going to end up on the website. So that's one point. But anything else that you want to tell us about that we should be anticipating?
Yes, let me go back to share my screen briefly. So again, we saw before the future of internet. This is futureofinterface.org. And all of the presentations will end up in the auditorium. And all of the things you're sharing with us about new technologies will show up in the Exploratorium. Please, anything that you see in there, sometimes stuff isn't in there that I know we all know about, but we just assume it's in there. So, we don't know that it's not in there. So please tell us anything. And then in the forum, you will find that there is this is the place where we have the discussion, so you can join in the discussions. This will get you into the Discord server where all of the discussions going on, and then the R&D agenda up here. So this is the place we come to actually find all of the information about the agenda and where it is. There's announcements and stuff will be down here. So this is the one point of focus. For some reason not showing up here, but there's supposed to be I know why, because I'm in edit mode. There's a feedback button over here that normally we'll see. And what you can do is to, if I go into a private window quickly, I'll show you because this is important. So you can always jump to any place you want to. You see this feedback here. You can at any point just click on this and you can highlight any part of the screen that you see that there's a problem with or you want to talk about, and then click and then enter your comment. And then you just send it off to us by just clicking next. And you can either put your name or not, send feedback, XXXX. That will send a note back to us. So this is a quickie way to tell us about anything, put in the URL, provide any feedback. Same thing for the R&D agenda when you're looking at it, et cetera. So you can provide feed that way. Also, we got foi@umd.edu. The whole purpose of this thing is to build this research agenda and also this resource tool here, which the site is for allowing students and everything else to be able to explore not only visions, but also all of the different types of interfaces that exist. So our goal is to try and advance this area and then to advance the research agenda. Discord is going to be the main place we use for just carrying on the discussions. And this will be the place where we can come back and see the results. Thank you very much. And so, Vint, I'm going to give you the last word. So I toss the mic back to you.
Sorry, I had to find the microphone. Well, first of all, this has been an amazing day, or 2 days. I've got piles of notes here. Just to say thank you, Greg, for doing this in the first place, and second to the team for putting it all together. Clearly an important exercise, a milestone in accessibility, but much more to be done given all the things that we talked about and all the things, unanswered questions that we clearly have articulated. So we don't lack for work, but we certainly have energized a lot of motivation to make progress.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. And with this, we will sign off.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to add one thing. Wanted to thank Meghana as well for working from home today, and she's also part of the team. And it's futureofinterface.org, not internet. That is all.
I keep saying future of internet. Thank you. Futureofinterface.org. And Meghana was exposed to COVID. She doesn't have it, but she stayed home. And so that's why she's operating even from there. So thank you.
One question, Greg and team, how long will this doc be open and editable? If we wanted to sleep on a few things or contribute, like when will you be when's the last time you're gonna be checking this? Because it looks like you're gonna port it over to the website.
Yeah, we'll port it over to the website, but we'll leave it open. We're going to take a snapshot off now just in case because it's open to everyone. Some vandals get in and start destroying it. But we're going to just leave it open for the next week, and then we'll probably pull it down, give everybody a chance to think. And then it'll be over here, and then you still have the ability. We're going to work out a mechanism for people to be able to continually add in a very ad hoc fashion, in a very simple fashion, as long as we can before it attracts a nuisance. Thanks. Excellent question. Any other question? Okay, then we're off. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.